Welcome back to Conversation from the Crossroads of Southern Music, History, and Culture with Dr. Bob Beatty. This is a bonus episode, a playlist featuring the repertoire of the Hourglass, Duane and Gregg's band that went to California in 1967 to make it big and flamed out after 2 albums. Hourglass is a pretty fascinating time period in Allman Brothers lore. It's encompasses chapter 4, A Play All Night, Duane Allman and the Journey to Fillmore East. The quick story of Hourglass is the band emerged out of the Allman Joys, who had just joined forces with 2 members of an Alabama-based band called the 5 Minutes or the 5 Minutes. They changed their name a couple times, but basically they took Paul Hornsby and Johnny Sandlin into their band when they lost their drummer and their bass player. Johnny and Paul were available because Eddie Hinton, whose name's going to come up here in a little bit, left their band to stay in Muscle Shoals and record full time. Now, the Allman Joys sign a very onerous record contract, somewhat at the behest of their manager, Bill McEuen of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, who discovers them in St. Louis, rocking in a place called Gaslight Square, calls LA and says, I have just found the next Rolling Stones, and gets them to sign this contract with Liberty Records, which has a fascinating history that I'm going to spend some time in just a little bit. But Liberty, like a lot of entities in Los Angeles or in the entertainment industry, had some very strict standards for how they like to do things. And artists signed, in Duane and Gregg's case, signed a very onerous contract with Liberty Records that gave Liberty Record full control over the band and its activities. And visually, this comes through when you see the photos of the band dressed up. There's a pretty famous photo of Gregg sitting on his organ on a television show. Duane's in the background with a doily around his neck. This was this kind of faux, hip, psychedelic look that the record company was banking on. But to me, it always looks like something that record company squares would imagine hip bands would look like. And the music's always sounded like that to me. It is pop psychedelia. It sounds like Tom Jones over bombastic blood, sweat, and tears arrangements, if you will. And that was because their producer, Dallas Smith, who actually had some success before he got Hourglass, he was just unable to hear the potential of what Hourglass was, the band was, as a Southern rhythm and blues band, rather than trying to force them into this little box that was not them. And they didn't like the sound that he came up with, particularly on their first record. As they recorded their second record, Duane quit several times and went back south since he was so pissed off. The band disliked the material on their record so much that when they played live, they played very little of their records. They were playing a very heavy set of Southern rhythm and blues covers. And then, to make matters worse, as part of some marketing scheme to make the band maybe more mysterious or not overexposed, they forced guys who were used to playing 4 or 5 sets a night, certainly playing all night, 5, 6, 7 nights a week, it didn't matter, playing music, that was their life. They restricted them from playing. Now, when you look at the Hourglass over the calendar year or so, 18 months that they were around, you'll see they played a lot of gigs. But these were guys who were used to playing what Duane called the garbage circuit of the South. They were used to playing multiple times a night. It was not only the way they made money, it was also the way they passed time. And they loved playing. Hourglass made it up to San Francisco, played some shows there. They played a pretty famous stand at Whiskey A Go-Go where there were some pretty massive jams afterwards that Stephen Stills and Neil Young would go to, as at that point they were still part of Buffalo Springfield. But Liberty Records really did restrict them to a limited series of gigs. And these are shows where they absolutely cooked. And if you want to hear what they thought they sounded like or should have sounded like in the studio, that's B.B. King Medley, which is the first track on the Duane Allman anthology. It's also on the Dreams box set. That is the song, or they had a little demo session that they did down in Muscle Shoals in April of 1968. and they go back to LA with their tapes and say, this is what we sound like. And they were absolutely and roundly rejected. All right, let's talk a little bit about the repertoire as I was able to piece it together and play all night. You know, we're talking about a cover band. So there's not a lot of original material. All of it has been Gregg's to this point. 2 songs that were in their repertoire, one of them becomes an Allman Brothers standard, Leaving Trunk and Statesboro Blues, which they learned from Taj Mahal's debut record. And famous story, Duane decides to learn slide because of Jesse Ed Davis's slide on Statesboro Blues. I've got one track with 2 different people doing it. I've got Solomon Burke's version of I'm Hanging Up My Heart for You, which is probably the biggest hit of that song. And then I also added Percy Sledge's version for 2 reasons. One is Percy Sledge is the Muscle Shoals guys. They probably would have heard Sledge's version as well, even though they were out in LA. Second is J-Mo was in Percy Sledge's band in this era when Duane and Gregg were out in LA. And I just thought it was an interesting connection. No, J-Mo didn't record on this song with Percy Sledge. I don't think J-Mo recorded in the studio before he recorded with the Allman Brothers. I could be wrong there. Little Milton, Feel So Bad. A couple things about Little Milton and Feel So Bad. Little Milton is Gregg's favorite singer. He said that his entire life. Feel So Bad was in his solo repertoire, and it ended up on the Gregg Allman Tour album in 1974 from the Laid Back tour. Derek Trucks band played Feel So Bad when Mike Madison joined the lineup, and to the end of their career, Tedeschi Trucks band still does Feel So Bad. Got 2 Bobby Blue Bland songs on here, and like Duane and Gregg, great interpreter of other people's music, and that's what a lot of blues singers are. A lot of singers are. Soul singers are. It's very much in the tradition to take a song and make it your own. So I've got on here Stormy Monday, the T-Bone Walker song. This is the version the Allman Brothers, the arrangement the Allman Brothers made famous at Fillmore East. And then also added Turn On Your Love Light. Now, both of these songs were in the repertoire of every band of that era. Love Light is a song everybody plays. Gosh, all the jam bands were playing it when I was coming up in the 90s as well. I don't know if they're still playing it. But I put Love Light on here for 2 reasons also. It's an homage to Pigpen of the Grateful Dead. This was his signature tune. And also Colonel Bruce Hampton, before he was a colonel, was someone Duane really loved and admired, the Hampton Grease Band. And it was one of his favorite songs. And the influence he has had in the Allman extended family is just absolutely immense. So I thought I'd pay a little homage to him. Added the Yardbirds, Over, Under, Sideways, Down. I could have added any number of Yardbirds songs. The piece I want to say to you is when I researched this era, one of the things that jumped out at me was the number of people who referenced how great the Almond Joys were because they covered Yardbirds songs. The Yardbirds were like this marker of greatness. And Almond Joys had recorded Shapes of Things where Duane channeled that incendiary Jeff Beck solo at the end. It's really beautiful. Y'all should check that out. That's on another playlist. Also, I got the next song is Dimples. Now I added the Johnny Jenkins version because that's the closest we're going to get of a recorded version that is on the major streaming services. The Johnny Jenkins version is there. That's certainly the Hourglasses arrangement. Duane learned that from Paul Hornsby, who learned it from Eddie Hinton. I told you I was going to mentioned him earlier, who wrote some songs actually, or at least a song on Hourglass's second record. Paul Hornsby learned it from Eddie Hinton, who is the one who did the arrangement. They did it in their band before they joined up with Duane and Gregg in Hourglass. Of course, Dimples is a song that Duane sang in the Allman Brothers. There are several versions out there. The most circulated is the one from Ludlow Garage in spring 1970. One last piece on Dimples. I have on the YouTube playlist only Duane's version of Dimples from the Muscle Shoals sessions that he did, his solo sessions in January of 1969. And that's got Paul Hornsby and Johnny Sandlin of Hourglass and Barry Oakley on bass. Tobacco Road by the Nashville Teens has a little bit of an interesting backstory because in the Almond Joys era, just before Hourglass, the songwriter of Tobacco Road, John D. Loudermilk, had seen the Almond Joys and took Duane and Gregg under his wing for a summer, teaching them about songcraft, songwriting. Gregg really learned a lot for them. So he's the one who he tried very hard to get them a contract while they were in Nashville and just was unable to. And he basically said, you're going to have to head west. They remember that they had already gone to New York and not passed an audition. Now, not Nashville. The next stop is going to be LA. Though Duane continued to hone his chops as a player and certainly as an arranger, and Gregg's songwriting improved, Hourglass trip was pretty much a disaster. Things were rough for the guys in Los Angeles, and they grew incredibly homesick. Hourglass bassist and later a guitarist at Muscle Shoals, Pete Carr, had this to say. Duane and I shared an apartment, and we would play together a lot. I remember Gregg, Duane, and I playing and singing Long Black Veil, which is the Lefty Frizzell song. That would have been the version he knew. I remember us harmonizing on it, and it was really a moment separated from everything else we were doing. It was like a close family thing. Now I'll sum up the story. Duane quits Hourglass for good in August 1968. He heads back south, specifically to Daytona Beach. In the first 3 weeks of September 1968, Duane joins, records, and performs live with Butch Trucks' 31st of February. He links up with Barry Oakley in Jacksonville to discuss this band idea that he has in his head. And he plays his first session in Muscle Shoals on Clarence Carter's The Road of Love. That's just 3 weeks in September 1968. And I think that would sum up what Duane learned from the entire LA Hourglass experience. Something to the effect of, I need to stay in the South to do what I do best. And that's exactly what happened. Vitamin ABB, trust me, I'm a doctor.